I want to welcome you all to our second episode of Header Footer Gallery Presents. Today we will be doing a retrospective on Adie Sykes exhibition for NMC Afrofuturisms. Today with me we have my host Constanza Salazar, Adie Sykes, the curator of Afrofuturisms, and producer Harshini Karunaratne. The Header Footer Gallery is part of the New Media Caucus and is dedicated to promoting the creative output of our members by situating their work in thoughtfully curated exhibitions that take place across our entire web presence. The Media Caucus is an international nonprofit association formed to promote the development and understanding of new media art. We represent and serve artists, designers, practitioners, historians, theorists, educators, students, and scholars, recognizing new media art to be inherently disciplinary, multimodal, and evolving. We support and advance a wide range of inquiry to catalyze further evolution of the field. The New Media Caucus is committed to extending this and sustaining the diversity of our community, board, and membership to promote an environment of equality, inclusion, and respect for difference. We prioritize inclusion as an ongoing collaborative process of growth that we continually address, both within the caucus and within our field. And now I give it to you, Connie.
Yes, it is my great pleasure of welcoming Adia to our Zoom presence space as well. So thank you, Adia, for being here. I'm also going to read a little bit about Adia's bio. She is an arts organizer and curator based in Chicago. Her practice seeks to center philosophies of improvisation, intuition, and care, engaging them as tools through which meaningful relationships between artists and viewers can be cultivated, while leaving space for the vernacular to mingle with constructs of history and theory. As an administrator advocating for racial equity and sustainable ecosystems for creative practitioners, Adia is co-director of programs at Three Walls, which is an arts organization that fosters contemporary art practices that respond to lived experiences, encouraging connections beyond art. She is also a lead organizer of the Chicago Arts Census, a citywide research project that collects, maps, and visualizes data that illuminates the lived experiences and working conditions of art workers in Chicago. Her curatorial projects include Locating Memory, Project Radio London, and the Petty Biennale #2. She has also realized projects with the Art Institute of Chicago, Sullivan Galleries, Woman Made Gallery, Acre, Material Exhibitions, Roman Susan Gallery, and Comfort Station. She also currently serves as the board of directors for Chicago Dance Makers Forum. Adia has earned a master's in arts administration and policy from the School of Art Institute of Chicago and a bachelor's in anthropology from the University of Chicago. So right now I want us to talk about a little bit what a retrospective means. So I was hoping that Renee could also introduce that a little bit.
Okay. So, So first of all, the idea was to call them postmortems because that's what they used to be called in one of my prior jobs. But that's a little bit grim with how the year has been going. So we finally settled with retrospective. And the goal of this whole thing is to look back at exhibitions that we've had at the New Media Caucus and figure out like what happened, how we do this, what was promoting this. And it's a way both to help curators reflect on their own work, but also to help people understand both the process of curation as well as expand on what the exhibition did. So it's a platform for curators. It's a way to get feedback on your own exhibitions. And finally, it's a way for us to give even more of a voice to curators. And I think that's pretty much what it is.
So it's a nice learning opportunity, I think, as well. But let's start with a couple of questions, the interview, right? So to Adia, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, I'm super excited to be joining y'all. Thanks for asking me. Well, my name is Adie Sykes, and I am based in Chicago, as Constanza so generously offered. In Chicago is the ancestral lands of the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi nations, as well as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee, Sac, and Fox. But I've been in Chicago for about 10 years now, originally from San Diego, and really kind of fell into art, as so many of us do, and came into curating or organizing or whatever kind of word we want to call it, organizing, while in grad school at SAIC for Arts Administration, and realizing that there's such beauty in working with folks who create things. And while I don't necessarily make art myself, getting to be surrounded by and really fed by creative practitioners has been probably the most rewarding part of being a curator. And moving through exhibitions, getting to really have fun and play with the different topics, different subject matters, going down different rabbit holes, has been wonderful over the past few years. And my process, if I even want to, I call it that because that's such a formalized way to put it sometimes, not even sometimes claiming curator with the capital C, really thinking about intuition, improvisation, and how those two things in particular can be methods of engagement with artists, with audiences, recognizing that improvisation implies a kind of framework or a basis of knowledge and understanding, and then having pivots happen within that, right? So leaving space. It's a dialogic practice. I strive to extend care and really be interested in dialogue with the folks that I'm working with. And so putting together AfroFuturisms in the moment of 2020 and into 2021, mind you, which I know we'll get into later, and really inform the process of this one in particular, but really wanting to be in conversation with artists and the people who know their work, who know the context in which it was created the best, which is the artist, the person that created it, right? And so placing a lot of authority with the artist or the maker. And it's a practice that's still emerging. It's a practice that's very organic. And it's been such a joy to have some time and some space, and to continue to have time and space, like with you all, to think about what it means to be in community with artists and create exhibitions, whether they be in virtual space or in physical space.
Thank you for that. So I was curious to know, you were invited to participate in the early stages of the Header Gallery as a guest curator, and you did the Afrofuturism show. Can you tell us a little bit about how it was developed, the theme specifically, and why it was so important for you to create this show, especially at this time, right? 2020, 2021, right?
Yeah. When I got the email to potentially do this, we were in the midst of uprising, and then in the midst of many a pandemic, right? Not just COVID. And so I think I was coming over the hump of thinking, well, like, what the fuck is art gonna do in the midst of all of this, right? In that place of really like hopelessness, and seeing what was happening in the world, seeing what was happening in the community, seeing the rug get pulled out from under so many people who I know, from myself, things like that. And so in the grand scheme of things, curating a little exhibition did not seem like the business at the time, right? Like there were other things that we should be tending to. And so coming up over that hump, over that thinking, and getting this email and being provided this space to explore and to play. And I mean, we were all up in the house because it was still in the midst of lockdown, right? So I got nothing better to do. But that timing of it was really, really serendipitous in many ways, because I was just starting to think about how can I shift my practice to, one, explore something that interests me, but two, hopefully have conversations that are resonant with others, even if it's just a conversation that's resonant between myself and the artists who are participating. Audience is great, but success in that moment, in that context, was really like, maybe there are other folks who need what I'm seeing as an outlet for myself, for themselves, right? So going into the kind of planning stage of that, thinking about the fact that we were seeing so much Black death and seeing so many conversations centered around the mortality of being Black in this country, and wanting to think instead about survival and joy, and really the hope that comes with, and the beauty and the depth, and I could keep going on with adjectives, but all of the other things that are so integral to the Black experience, that in that particular moment, in my particular moment of my life at that time, were pushed to the wayside, right? And so Afrofuturisms, which has been around for a long time, really emerged in my mind as something to dig into, as something that's also a survival tool, that's a mechanism for channeling hope and visioning and thinking about a radically different future for folks who look like me, right? And so the start of this project might have been in that moment or in that context of like hopelessness, despair, you know, we were all living through the world at that time, right? Seeing what was really like a bit of light from the opportunity to explore something, settling on Afrofuturism as a concept, as a theory, as now kind of a discipline in and of itself, and it having its own kind of body of knowledge that's been theorized around it, and saying, what else could this be? The escapism that sometimes comes with the dreaming and the radical imagination that Afrofuturism necessitates. And so that bit started as some escapism, but then through more reading, through more conversations, really, with artists who submitted such beautiful and phenomenal work, thinking about, oh wow, people are like using this, right? Like it's not just a theory anymore. It's not just being employed as a theory. Like people are doing the shit now, and people are thinking about creating these microcosms of beautiful existences for Black folks like now, not only because we need it, but because we want it and we want to see it happen, and we're not going to wait, right? And so it also became tethered in like a present. And there are folks who are now thinking about Afro-presentism, like
I was thinking Afro-nowism.
Afro-nowism, yeah. And there's this movement towards a more present kind of liberation, right?
I was wondering, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was wondering, do you think, because this is like, I think, this is my perception, that for a lot of people, particularly non-Black people, their first contact with Afrofuturism was Black Panther. Do you think that had something to do with this renewed interest, or do you think that was just like following the zeitgeist?
I mean, I think that Afrofuturism, maybe if we don't want to use that jargon of Afrofuturism, is kind of omnipresent, right? And so the fact that the rhetoric around it is being popularized again, or being, I guess, pushed to the fore, because it's been around.
Exactly.
Really like codified in the 90s, but was happening long before that. That more people are just kind of coming to it, or coming to language for it, but might have been practicing it. And really, there are different types of futurisms, like Indigenous futurism. There's many, many more types of this speculative thinking towards like a liberatory, that channels into a liberatory practice. And the fact that language is still being created and concretized around something that's been along for so long, really, I think really speaks to the necessity of this type of thinking and practice. There is that beauty of a space in which you're doing the simultaneous thing of acknowledging history while being rooted in a present, while also moving forward, both yourself and then a collective as well. And so there's also that call. And I don't think it is by chance that in the past few years, it's really been something that's been, talked about. I think about Lovecraft Country in particular, which I think was airing at the time that I was thinking through a lot of this. So I'm like, Hippolyta's moment with, naming yourself really fed into that, right? And what does it mean to self-identify all facets of yourself and claim them? So I think Black Panther definitely was a point of catalyst for something that's been around for a very long time. And we all need those in any type of discipline or thinking, something that spreads awareness, something that re-energizes, a decades-long discourse.
Yeah, I think it was.
Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. Okay.
No, I was just.
So I do think Black Panther.
Go ahead.
I think that Black Panther really moved the discussion a little bit in terms of a lot of it. But when I went to watch that movie, I wasn't in Mexico, and it was literally an all-black showing, except for me. I'm Mexican, right? Like, so semi of color, I guess you could say. But it was very interesting seeing how people reacted to it, because they were really responding to the fact it was a story that it wasn't about a white guy. Yeah, there's a white guy there, but he is more of a helper, which is normally the role that's a position for people of color, and rather seeing themselves centered. And you could feel the energy in the space when you walked out, and you can see how people are like co-opting the symbology of Black Panther into their daily lives. So I when I hear Afrofuturism, obviously it's tinted with fiction, it's tinted with all these things, but can you explain a little bit more of what else is there in Afrofuturism? Because I know that there's more to it than just speculative fiction, which is what Black Panther is.
Sure. I mean, Afrofuturism, it's an aesthetic, it's a philosophy, there's science based around it. And it's a line or lineage of thinking that uses history to explore the intersections of the African diaspora, its culture, its people, with science, technology. So as you're thinking in, the sci-fi vein, like Black as hell sci-fi, right? Is kind of one avenue. And again, been around for a long time. You had Sun Ra doing it, long before it was kind of, again, codified within the academy by Mark Derry in like what, 93, early 90s?
94, yeah.
But again, it was happening. And so I'll preface it by saying, like, I am not a scholar in Afrofuturism, right? I'm an enthusiast and a participant. And so even in my own understanding of Afrofuturism and realizing that there's this beautiful simultaneity to it, it is an acknowledgement of history, of past, of people, of ancestors. It is an acknowledgement of your present moment, your context, what's happening around you. And it's also that futuring aspect. So in the title of Afrofuturisms, there's those brackets around futurism, right? The constant in that, I'm also not a math person. So, but I know enough to like use these brackets, right? So the constant being Afro, that is the constant. It is through the lens of a Black experience. The futurism is the variable. So it does some of that speaking to past, present, future, anything along that kind of spectrum of lineages, what have you. And if the first iteration of that title had the brackets around Afro, thinking about maybe there's different perspectives that can be thinking about futurity. And I'm like, actually, in this present moment, this expression is going to be like Blackity Black as hell, right? So the constant is going to be that particular experience of the African diaspora. And maybe what instead we explore together is how we're employing it at these different points in time, in thinking, in lineage, what have you.
No, I think you said something very, well, everything that you said is very fascinating, and it's very illuminating because, like you said, it is a term that was coined by Mark Derry, right? Like a retroactive term, which has been, of a genre, of an aesthetic, of all these things that have been happening for a while. And it just reminds me of Andre 3000, for example, in the 90s or in the 2000s. But I know it brings to mind a lot of these things, but also, there was an essay by Stephanie Dinkins that I wanted to bring up. She talks about Afro-nowism. And to me, it didn't surprise me, but what I found interesting is that she talks about incremental change and how we can do that within communities, right? And it's not so much thinking about like this distant future that we have to attain necessarily, right? But something about thinking about the present. And I think that's what your exhibition actually does, is brings it back to the present. And not only thinking about the lineages, the history, and the future, but this emphasis on that, I think, is really inspiring, but also really important for us, especially at the time that it was done, the exhibition, right? And with everything that was happening. So that wasn't so much a question, more so just, I think, a comment that I really appreciated about it too. But one of the things I also want to talk about a little bit was the interactive portion of the exhibition, right? And you worked with KT, which is who is a New Media Caucus member as well, who designed the exhibition. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you chose to do it in an interactive way. And maybe we can look at the exhibition itself right now. So why did you choose to present it in this sort of way? What does it lend the concept as well of Afrofuturism to?
Yeah, working with KT Duffy is spectacular. They're the most delightful human. So shout out to KT and a big thanks for, taking on this project. It felt important to create a space that was truly a space.
Yeah.
Right. And while we were in the middle of the COVID pandemic and everything was shut down and many things moved online, there were examples of what it looks like to, throw up a page that scrolls, and that's an exhibition, and those are beautiful. And in thinking about, okay, I don't necessarily want a scrolling page. I don't know how to create myself something that's, interactive, but KT does. And KT was so down with thinking about what does it mean to play with space and something that's a virtual environment that allows viewers to move through it, to kind of like pick their own adventure in many ways. And it felt important to like give the audience agency in doing it and how they interacted with it. So you kind of step into the exhibition and you encounter the text, sure, for some grounding, for some clarity, for some context. But from there, you really get to move at your leisure. And so in thinking about the thread of Afrofuturism, thinking about the thread of the pandemic, and thinking about how we were all occupying or not occupying space, it felt important to try to not necessarily replicate being in a physical gallery space, but to do something that created something other, which is, I think, integral to what a lot of Afrofuturist thinking kind of does. It was also an experiment for me because I haven't necessarily done virtual exhibitions before. I am very much a analog human. So that was, one of the first things that I'm like, yo, I've never done a virtual exhibition. I don't know if you actually need to do this. I am not the one to be like experimenting with new media platforms. But seeing such beauty in like that process of exploration of how accessible virtual spaces can be, especially as opposed to some physical spaces, it felt important to try to create a space that spoke to the breadth of work that came in and that was incorporated into the show. And so creating something that is its own little world, that is its own little microcosm, really felt like an important thing to do in that moment.
Definitely. I think you really carved out a really nice space, that everyone could have autonomy over, agency rather, and to just experience it anywhere that they can, like in their homes, etc. I think that was really well done. Renee, did you have a question by any chance?
Well, actually, she covered my first question, which was what led you to using a 3D space rather than an exhibition. So that one's answered. But I would like to hear a little bit about your curatorial choices and your like artist choices. Like, how did you choose these artists? Why did you choose them? And like maybe as we talk through the spaces and everything, like talk about your curatorial decisions in the process.
Yeah, so we actually did an open call for it, and so many dope things came through the submission form, right? I was like, yeah, I feel like that's my favorite part of being a curator or an arts organism, just like getting to be nosy and see what everybody else is doing. Like that's the fun part, right?
Yeah, it is.
But really deciding on these artists because something resonated. I mean, I mentioned intuition at the top of this as being integral to my practice, and I really do believe that, like as a methodology. And so there were things that came across where I was like, that doesn't seem like it. Or that maybe that does. And believing along with that kind of vein of intuition, like there's a reason why that's piqued your interest, even if you don't have language for it yet. And so seeing threads kind of being woven together between these artists, and then really sitting with that and trying to make them a bit more clear with language and through my own thinking. And so settling on the phenomenal artists, and I'm going to read them all out. Lindsay Grace, Jonathan Sangster Barber, Afatasi the artist, Charles Ryan Long, Stephen Montanar, sorry, Alea Digwe, Shori Sims, Sandra Henderson, and Makeba Dubose. Not all of them based in Chicago, but all of them, again, resonating with that open call and having work that I think spoke to how complex or multifaceted I was hoping the conversation around Afrofuturisms would be, or that was present in the kind of thinking that led up to the exhibition. And so they all are working in very, very different media, like very different media, everything from painting to video work, to writing an installation, to a critical gameplay or an online digital game. And it felt important to also have a multiplicity of media present that also continues that through line of complexity and depth within not only these artists' practice, but within the thinking about the exhibition. And I think every single one of them was approaching it in such a different way, has situated themselves within the trajectory of thinking about Afrofuturism in such different ways that they almost kind of like fell together in many ways. And so there's, like, as you're moving through the exhibition, again, it's a choose your own adventure kind of thing. So they're not necessarily placed like on a wall in a way that reads like a traditional exhibition. but instead you can kind of connect the dots for yourself. So it does kind of put a lot of the onus on the viewer, which I don't sometimes think is a bad thing.
No, absolutely. That is part of the curatorial discourse, this idea of no longer dictating paths for visitors, but rather to create spaces where you can move around and where the discussion is more thematic rather than chronological and all these kind of things. And I think Afrofuturism itself as an exhibition does this successfully, where it's, well, do you want to go here? Do you want to go there? Which also goes back to things like MUDs, which are like massively online text adventures. Used to be in the 80s, where you would log in and then choose and go right, and then you see a room filled with this, and then what do you do? Pick thing. So it has a little bit of that feel, Afrofuturism. So, and it's retro, but it's sometimes futuristic. So it's one of these interesting things you did with the exhibition. Which leads me to the other thing. You mentioned it already a little bit, but in the opening text of the exhibition itself, you talk about grounding the future in the past and the present. How do you believe you achieved this?
Did I achieve it? That's also part of the curatorial decision. Like, did that work? I don't know. I think the intention was to not necessarily have the artist create work for the exhibition, and instead employing something that they might be sitting with, that they want to dig deeper into, that they've created before, for the exhibition. And so there was a moment in thinking about which works, well, while in conversation with each artist, like thinking about which works would fit within that kind of box of the theme, where we were all really sitting in the same present, right? In that meeting, starting with acknowledging, hey, how are you doing today in the midst of the world that's going on? And so I really like wholeheartedly believe that the works that were selected together through conversation were works that were filtered through the lens of that present, right? And so in that way, I think it's grounded in the present. I think that the moments of speculation that were happening in those conversations and thinking about a future and thinking about carving out inroads to get to that future, those building blocks, those stepping stones that you were talking about, Constanza, all of those being integral to what was selected in that moment, right? There had to have been a reason, an intuitive kind of impulse as to why each of these artists presented the work that they did in that particular moment. And I mean, I think it's really important to say, like, in a particular moment that, especially for Black folks, was a lot, right? So the fact that Black artists even submitted artwork in the midst of the chaos of the world, carved out time, space, energy to do this art thing in the grand scheme of all that was happening, really speaks to the fact that there was something resonant, not just within this framework, but in their own workings through their practice that needed to be said at the time. And so I really tried to sit with that, which isn't necessarily a like concrete answer to your question, but like there's presence, you know, in the like making of the exhibition that I hope stays, because it is in a virtual space, it's up, it's gonna be up.
Yeah.
I think speaks to that present moment in that context, but also has a kind of resonant thread through today.
No, yeah, absolutely. Connie.
Yeah. So one of the more, I think one of the questions I really like asking curators is, what did they learn from the exhibition itself? Not just like curatorial practice, not just the logistics, but I imagine, like you keep, saying, right, you created the exhibition in a very particular time, right, when there was a lot of grief right? There's a lot of, all these different images that we were looking at in social media, television, etc. But and one of the roles or one of the jobs of curators is to put out like a call, right? And expect, certain people to answer the call. And I assume, we learn a lot about, oh, there's all these different people that are also thinking about, this theme, this Afrofuturism concept, right? In so many different ways. But I'm curious to know what you learned from this experience, right? That perhaps you didn't know before, and not just curatorial, but just everything that happened, right?
Yeah. I think one of the things that stood out to me was like there has to be some type of Black collective consciousness or something operating, and I'm sure some psychology person is on that already. But what emerged from conversations or the studio visits, the virtual studio visits that happened for this exhibition, was like everyone having their own take or spin on it, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But what was almost omnipresent was the fact that this is a methodology happening now. Like how present that hope, that visioning, the active kind of verb quality of Afrofuturism is as something being worked, being prodded, being expanded, being tended to was. And so
the presence of it, right?
The presence of it, yeah, the fact that it kind of emerged as this like active kind of conjuring. It felt like we were all in this space together, really trying to just like conjure up a little microcosm of the future that we want, right? And so that is definitely something that I still sit with, the kind of collective thought that either springs up in times of crisis, sure, but also maybe times of pause, maybe times of visioning, maybe times of dreaming. Is there a kind of collective vibration that we're all kind of tuning into or something, to get a little woo-woo with it? Other things that I learned, virtual exhibitions are hard, like y'all have done them and hats off to you. But I'll also say that like this was a long process for many a reason. I think the pandemic being part of it. I think uprisings being part of it. I think burnout in all of its forms for everyone was part of it. And it's like I really confidently say like this exhibition, the timeline that it happened on, the trials and tribulations of it as well, were really wrapped up in that particular kind of moment, right? Where chaos did reign in so many ways, where time meant something so different, where doing an art thing that's not, your full-time job, doing something kind of extracurricular in the arts, also took on different meaning for a lot of us, right? And so also recognizing at what point in my practice, what point in exhibition making, do we sometimes press pause or need to press pause? I think in hindsight, recognizing that maybe there should have been pause. Maybe there should have been more communication around, let's all put this down for a bit and come back to it. And so as someone who, really hasn't been curating long, like I'm by no means an authority on anything, really. Developing my own practice in a way that recognizes the need to put things down and to be communicative about that with the artists that I'm working with. Because again, it was a long process. The build out for it took quite a long time. The studio visit process took a long time to schedule. And while I don't think that's a bad thing, I do think there are ways that we as curators, with the root of that being to care, sometimes need to recalibrate and get back to that. And so that this exhibition was like a real moment of like, okay, you know, like we're fleshing out our own practice. We're fleshing out working with all these artists. We're fleshing out working with them in a virtual space that relies on the build out by somebody else. You know, like there were many a moving part, and realizing like, yo, this is such a project of its time. Like I highly doubt that any of us will curate in the same way in the future, you know, like having been through the past few years, having done, you know, exhibitions virtually, particularly within the context of like New Media Caucus and Header and Footer and all of these things, right? So it's a continual process. It is a continual humbling, like learning experience. And I'm very privileged to be in the spongy phase of it.
Definitely. Was this your first time by any chance working with new media, or have you worked with it before, like creating new media artworks?
In grad school, yes, dabbled or worked with artists who were exploring new media.
Mm-hmm.
But again, as a very like analog person and a lot of facets of my life, you know, always shying away from that which would fall under the umbrella of new media. And also now realizing, having done more research for both this exhibition and out of curiosity, how big that umbrella is.
Yeah,
how
definitely.
occasionally fraught and complex that umbrella is as well. And so while not the first time, I think this was the first kind of deep dive that I got to do with new media.
So I guess that brings me to the other question I have. What do you think the future is of new media art, right? I know it's a really big question.
Yeah.
Like, what can it do, right? And I don't know, I guess I'm thinking about, you know, what you were saying with Black collective thought and how important that is, but also the importance and power of art in general to mobilize people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also bring together people in a theme like Afrofuturism, you know, that you so graciously created this opportunity for, right? But I'm thinking also, what is maybe not just, you know, the future of new media art, but what is the future of art, and what would you like to see more of, for example? I know they're big questions.
The question keeps getting like bigger.
Such a casual question.
Right. I'll approach it. Okay. So I think about, and I promise I'm a circuitous storyteller, if you couldn't tell.
That's great.
Let's go on the journey. Let's go on the journey, shall we? I think about lineages and trajectories a lot. And I intentionally use the word like lineage or genealogy when it comes to Black art in particular, because of some of that Black collective thought, but also this real rootedness and like a standing on the shoulders of that which has come before you, which I think many people do, not just Black folks. And so I think about the way that art has been used to mobilize, as you said, for movement. I think about Emory Douglas with the Panthers as their minister of culture, right? And how he created a visual rhetoric, which really did rally a people around a cause and a mission. And so as you're speaking about what is the future of art, of new media, I'm like, what does it mean to be in that lineage?
Right.
Of the Emory Douglases, of art that has used to catalyze and mobilize people. And now as we move collectively onto digital and virtual spaces, is this maybe not just another step in that kind of lineage? And so I don't know what necessarily comes after that, but I do see it on that same kind of trajectory, right? And I'll also say that when it comes to this idea of like mobilizing or catalyzing, what have you, that art can do, I love the art world a lot. I'm going to stay in the art world a lot, but I think we talk a lot and we theorize a lot. And what does it mean to create art and theory and discourse, as well as casual conversation around art that then gets translated into action and movement, right? Like, I don't disparagingly say that like Afrofuturism might catalyze some thought, but it's like it hasn't necessarily gotten to this exhibition being Afrofuturisms. It hasn't necessarily got to the point of like, what does action look like in service of a liberatory movement? Mm-hmm. And maybe that's not what that particular exhibition at that time was supposed to do. I don't think it was supposed to do that at that time. But what does it mean to create art, to create exhibitions that kind of just stay?
That linger, right?
Yeah, that stay, that linger, that keep walking in some way. And it's something that I think about a lot. I am cautious to put too much emphasis on like art bringing about change. But I think that art is in such proximity in unique ways to power and to wealth, that that's really something we should all be thinking about and exploring more. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, that's excellent. Renee, did you have another question by any chance?
I actually do. So when you're talking about new media, and its future and everything, do you think that future lies in technology or somewhere else? Because one of the things of new media is that it basically encompasses anything that's new. So like bioart or cyborgs and all these other things that don't necessarily exist within a computer. So do you think it's going to be there? Or even like, will it move to different spaces that are not like mainstream, like the internet as we know it? What do you think?
Another big question is the thing.
Oh, sorry.
Don't apologize for it. I love a good 11 a.m. thought bubble. You know, I think out of necessity, it will exist in a multiplicity of ways and places. I think about art history and how certain types of media are still around. And we still got acrylic painting, yo. And it's not going away as a bad example. But and like things that have permanence for so many reasons, for the kind of tactile quality, for the aesthetic quality, for folks who like really just dig the history of that making practice. And I don't want to necessarily separate new media from that conversation, right? As a discipline that is so other from the paintings, the collaging, so many other disciplines. It's like I almost don't want to separate it from that. You know what I mean? And that could partly be my own like naivete around new media, which I'm definitely sitting in. But I feel like there's a reason things persist. And even though I don't have language for it right now, I don't know if like new media is going to be an exception. And I think that new media, while being relatively new, I know it probably has a longer history than like we're thinking about with all of the things you just said. I don't know. I think it's one of those disciplines that will, out of necessity, evolve and mutate and have so many different types of permutations and remixes in the future as all the other kind of disciplines have, in order to reify itself, in order to stay not only relevant, but to also keep pushing itself, right? So I almost think it's a disservice if it just exists in one space, as so many other disciplines have kind of taught us, right? There's a reason we're still doing art. There's a reason we're still producing new discourses. It's because new shit is happening constantly. Someone's gonna think of something different. So I think new media is definitely within that same vein.
Awesome. Okay, so that's all the time we have today. I want to thank Adia for being here and Connie and Harshini for assisting me in this production. This is our second episode of what we hope will be a much more prolific series. So stick with us for our next show. Thank you and have a nice day.
Bye. Thank you.
You both.